can I formally welcome Cecilia Jastrzembska to our little meeting. I won't pretend to give a list of all the things she does and how she does them, and that really is going to be, if you can unfold a bit of a current biography as we go, that's probably the best thing for the evening. So the floor is yours. We'll sort of probably take some questions at the end, but it might be as you've got to dash off, it might be somebody else that fields them, but we'll see how we go. If you feel we're a cozy little crowd and you want to invite and field your own questions, feel free. I think, as I said before, you're not going to get anybody here tonight who it's certainly not going to be a hostile audience, and we're not going to debate whether Brexit's a good or a bad thing or anything like that. Okay, go all yours, Cecilia.
Thanks so much. So hello everyone, and thank you very, very much for inviting me and Leah, my Vice President, and for hosting this, for setting this up, Barbara and Don particularly. It's a real pleasure to meet you all, even in 2D. For those of you who may not have met me before, as Don perfectly pronounced my name and surname, I'm Cecilia Jastrzembska, President of YEM, and by virtue of that, of course, a member of the EM UK National Board and Council, as is Leah. Generally speaking, I'm a senior policy advisor, so I tell various MPs and representatives what to do, and sometimes they listen to me and sometimes they don't. More for them. I am also a UK delegate for something called Europe Talks, which is something that's now run by a now elected MEP called Vivian Constanzo. It's literally, as it says, we talk about Europe. We go to Brussels about twice a year, and it's sponsored by Foundation for European Progressives and FES. I'm also 50/50 Parliament Ambassador, and that's a really awesome charity that basically works to create gender parity in Parliament, something that we need more than ever, and is going very well, given that that organization has kind of contributed directly to the most diverse and gender equal parliament we've ever had. I am also a control commission member for something called the Young European Socialists. So think of that like as a huge network of networks, a bit like Jeff Europe. So we do congresses and bureaus. And of course, I'm connected to Jeff Europe, given that that's our other parent organization apart from European Movement. Think tank is the Fabian Society, so they directly kind of elected the Labour government. I know there's quite a few Fabians in European Movement. I see them all the time. And I generally speak on feminism, AI, and international affairs / climate change. And I'm just going to give Leah a couple minutes to introduce herselves, and then I'll talk a bit about kind of YEM activities. We'll go to campaigns from Leah, come back to me for launch, and we'll sort of just keep it free flowing, keep it informal. I'm happy for people to just dive in. Up to you, Leah, on your one.
All right. Hi, everyone. My bio is going to be a lot shorter. My name is Leah. I am, in my day-to-day life, I'm a strategy associate at a tech company, which is why there's a shiny office behind me in Shoreditch. Within the Young European Movement, I'm the head of campaigns and I'm the vice president. I have been involved with the Young European Movement for far too many years now. I started up in Edinburgh and I'm so excited to talk about this later. We really struggled with youth involvement, so I have so many thoughts on that. But yeah, outside of that, I am also dabbling in politics a little bit. I'm usually more on the conservative side of things, but very important to note pro-European conservative, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. And that is a whistle-stop tour. I'll hand it back to Cecilia.
Brilliant. So I guess I'm just going to kind of walk you through the world of YEM, as it were, and give a couple of personal anecdotes. And as Don mentioned, I suppose, what's youth politics like? How do you get young people involved? Of course, that's a challenge that we have every single day. I'll kind of loop that in as well. So I was head of events last year, and of course I'm president now. And my general experience has been in organising a parliamentary event. So sometimes that's policy pamphlet launches with the Fabians. Sometimes that's big International Women's Day launches and panels and roundtables. So something we did, for example, as you may know, is that huge youth mobility campaign on Embrace Erasmus. So we started that. Leah and I were on the board in different roles last year. Last year now, we're in 2025. And we spearheaded this whole Embrace Erasmus campaign to get the UK, of course, to rejoin Erasmus, kind of make the case for its benefits, show that it is something that we had lost so much from by exiting. And of course, I think something that's not talked about enough is the fact that we never agreed to be withdrawn from it. So that is something that wasn't really emphasized. So we drafted this campaign. It was mainly President and Vice President Stella and Heidi. And we then kind of came together and created a petition, which now European Movement kind of has taken up the mantle for. And at that point, we had it, I think about, correct me if I'm wrong, Leah, but like 40,000 signatures. We got really, really high with that. So we partnered with the British Youth Council, who were great, who I'll talk a little bit more about later. We got the backing of several members of European Parliament, so Cole Markey, Natalie Loiseau. We of course got the backing of Sadiq Khan, which is really, really exciting. He's so pro-EU, he's great. And such a big voice, for London. It has a lot of reach, a lot of depth, and a huge influential sphere. So that was a really, really huge push. That was, I think, one of the challenges that we found with that is the wider challenge that we always find, which is getting backing. So something Leah and I will know very well is the hardest part, I think, of a campaign and running a campaign, particularly in youth politics, is getting people to sign up and get on board and get on your train, right? So at the beginning, we wanted to do this particular campaign and our key stakeholders didn't really like it, I'll be honest. They kind of squashed it or wanted to squash it, and we really had to fight quite hard by kind of going around the problem and doing a lot of kind of background stakeholder outreach, really kind of contacting everyone we could think of that could back that. And only when it started to get prominence, it started to climb the political agenda, did they then come around to the idea and go, actually, yeah, that's a really good idea. How about we do that? Literally, that's what happened. So that kind of brings me on to, in fact, I'll wait to speak about our campaign, but I'll go into some of the things that we've been up to. So I know I'm completely biased here, as in so biased, but I do think we've had an absolutely incredible year in YEM. So to give you a few highlights, for one, we've been represented at the Council of Europe. We have a really impressive head of policy called Leah Rea. She is doing a PhD, a diploma, is president of a think tank, our head of policy, and about 5 other roles. So she makes me look like I'm literally like a couch potato. So she does all of that with her eyes closed and sponsored policy consultations. I mean, she just does it all, literally. So we got her to the Council of Europe. We also were shortlisted for and then won a Youth Champions Award, which was bestowed on us by the EU delegation to the UK. And that was basically for, I guess, our continued and consistent efforts over the years from last year to this year, in basically creating bonds, collaborating, doing speaking engagements, of course, policy consultations and the like. We have also been chosen now by the EU delegation to the UK to be the co-chairs of something called the EU-UK Stronger Together Network of Networks. So that brought together 125 organizations last year. That was hosted by them, and we've been chosen as co-chair 1. And then BYC, which is British Youth Council, is co-chair 2. So that's me and someone called Zara Akusi. She's also a European Youth Forum delegate. And then apart from that, so we have basically just been doing public speaking engagements up and down the country. We've been represented I did the National Rejoin March. We've done obviously European Movement many times. We've spoken at Europe House and gone to Ireland, gone to all sorts of places, and we've been doing a lot of attending like Jeff, which is our other parent organization. We've been basically attending a lot of their meetings and creating first of their kind partnerships with various different stakeholders. Just wanted to pause there in case someone wanted to ask anything. Carry on. All good?
That sounds good.
Yeah, so that's been some of the kind of activity highlights. Some of the blockers we sometimes face, which are the classics in youth politics, is resources. So at the moment, we don't have a functioning bank account, which is an interesting scenario. So we kind of bank backwards with European Movement. We have, very little time. We're all volunteers, don't have a lot of money. So that's something that we have to contend with quite a lot. And of course, I guess, there's a lot of administrative work that goes on behind the scenes. So for say, for example, if we're selected for the European Youth event, which is really exciting, in its most competitive year, that also means selecting everyone. That means emailing everyone. That means registration links. That means booking transport. That means making sure everyone's done invoices and got refunds. So for every highlight that we have, there's about, I'd say, 20 to 40 hours work, easily. That's what goes on behind the scenes. And as unpaid volunteers, okay, that can obviously be quite challenging. So now I would just wanted to hand over to Leah to talk a bit about our campaign, and I can just sort of go back and forth as it's something we sort of co-spearheaded together.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Cecilia. So I'm just going to introduce our campaign, which we have titled Breaking the Silence, Ending the Violence. And what our campaign is focusing on is gender-based violence and gender-based hate crime. And we are advocating for policy changes, and especially also to mobilize young people in general to take action. To an extent, obviously, any campaign that you do will also always be an awareness campaign. For example, after our launch event, which was last month, one of my guests came up to me and said how much he had learned at the event, and also how much he did not realize that gender-based violence had not only not gone down, but actually gotten worse over the last couple of years. So we're always doing educating with every event that we do. And our campaign is really rooted in YEM's core values of equality, human rights, and European solidarity, especially recognizing that gender-based violence is not just a national issue, but it's a European one, it's a global one. And the reason why this matters is that gender-based violence is really a European-wide crisis. So about 1 in 3 women in the EU has experienced physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. And in some EU countries, femicide, which is the killing of women due to their gender, is on the rise with very little legal accountability. And there are some very inconsistent laws and protections across Europe. So while some EU countries have very strong laws against gender-based violence, others lack the proper protections, leading to huge disparities in safety, justice, and survivor support. So as a positive example, Ireland and Slovakia have strengthened their hate crime laws by explicitly including gender. Portugal, Greece, and France have gone beyond aggravating factors and criminalized gender-based hate speech. But in the UK, despite growing awareness of gender-based violence, the UK laws still don't really recognize its seriousness. So unlike other forms of hate crime, gender and gender identity are not recognized as aggravating factors during the offences. And the Crown Prosecution Service and the police define hate crimes as any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility, prejudice, based on a person's disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, or transgender identity. Very critically, gender is missing from that list, meaning that women and gender diverse individuals do not, receive the same protection under hate crime laws. And while the Equality Act 2010 does list gender as a protected characteristic in discrimination cases, it does not extend to criminal law. Other shortcomings are that, for example, in Scotland, 5 of the 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act are included in hate crime legislation, but again, gender is absent. And Northern Ireland doesn't have any hate crime legislation at all. And the evidence is really showing that misogynistic behavior is rarely an isolated incident. It often follows a troubling escalation, one that, if unchecked, can lead to violence in relationships in the wider community. So recognizing this pattern is really, really crucial for the prevention of gender-based violence and ultimately femicide. What we're aiming to achieve with our campaign is we're calling for the UK government to update its laws to ensure that gender-based violence, such as misogyny, is recognised, monitored, and treated with the gravity it deserves. This, for example, includes the inclusion of gender and gender identity as protected characteristics in UK and EU hate crime legislation, a legal definition of misogyny and gender-based hate to ensure consistent prosecution, recognition of gender as an aggravating factor and sentencing for crimes such as assault, harassment, and online abuse. And something that's very close to Cecilia's and my heart, I believe, is the data collection on gender-based hate crimes to measure the impact and to drive more effective policy changes. Why people should care, except for the obvious that gender-based violence is bad, is that silence enables violence. So if we don't speak up about it, if we don't discuss it, GBV remains normalized, and we really need voices to advocate for change. This really isn't just about the laws, it's also about changing mindsets. So addressing gender-based violence means tackling harmful stereotypes, misogyny, and toxic masculinity that fuel that violence. And finally, to bring it full circle to the European focus, European solidarity matters. Gender-based violence doesn't stop at borders. If we want a safer, more equal Europe, we must work together. We must have closer ties to Europe on this topic to demand justice across all countries. And final bit, how can you get involved if you're now really motivated? So you can participate in our gender-based violence poll, where we're gathering data to inform policy recommendations and help influence government strategies. So if you have a few minutes, if you have any experience with that topic, we would be incredibly grateful if you could fill out that poll. If you or anyone you know is under 35 and is interested in joining YEM, we invite you to become part of our wonderful youth community. If you fall outside of the age range, we welcome you to become a friend of YEM, which is a wonderful scheme that we've set up for people that would like to support our activities, but are sadly over the age of 35. And finally, if you are wanting to stay updated on what we're up to, there is a mailing list, or you can join one of our copious WhatsApp groups. And that was just a whistle-stop tour of our campaign. Happy to answer any questions or hand over to Cecilia to add anything I might have missed.
Any questions? I mean, anytime, but yes, put hands up, preferably electronically, but manually if you need to. Barbara Lodge.
I just wondered, are you linked into the EU campaign against FGM, female genital mutilation?
No.
It's a very big campaign. It's worth linking into.
Thank you. That's really useful.
Because obviously that occurs in Britain as well, and it's Europe-wide. Yes, I follow it very closely, so I think it's worth doing. Yeah.
Thanks for letting us know. That's really useful. I'll look that up.
Yes.
Can you send a link on, Barbara? Maybe it might be
I can send Cecilia something. Sure. I haven't got a link.
That'd be good. Great.
Just as out of interest as well, it's nothing to do with the EU, but talking about gender issues, and Afghanistan, there is an international campaign going at the moment to make gender apartheid an international crime.
Yes, yeah, I'm following that one.
That as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it links in with the EU somewhere, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know a couple of the organisers actually. We have each other on LinkedIn. We've talked, and I've got an article coming out with them myself actually, because I reported on like the first 100 days of the Afghanistan government, and everything they said they would do is what they actually did.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm well aware of that, and that's
brilliant.
Definitely on my radar. Yeah. I was just going to kind of give a little overview of I guess, pick up on what Leah said about that culture of normalization that we need to challenge, and what you mentioned about the need to collect data. And I know, Don, you were saying, where's the European link and how does Brexit kind of loop into this? And there's a whole bunch of research emerging about how our withdrawal from the EU has really undermined protections for women. So that can include the loss of automatic access to major EU systems like Schengen Information System, Europol, Eurojust, which are all platforms that were essential for sharing real-time data about criminal activities, including sexual violence. And of course, since we've left the EU, we've also lost the European arrest warrant. And that, of course, facilitated arrests across all EU member states. And now that it doesn't apply to the UK, just like losing those platforms, we have lost a huge tool in information sharing, and therefore we are literally less informed. I mean, generally it goes back to that strength that we have when we're connected, because without that crucial data, we're seeing perpetrators slip through the gaps and also widen those gaps. And so that's something that I'm now looking at trying to emphasize so at the moment, Leah's just writing an open letter to government, which we are reviewing, and then we will ask other organizations to sign. And that's one of the main ways to influence policy and drive real change. And actually, since that time, I got an email in today, so I'm part of Fabian's, as I mentioned, and I was selected for this thing called it's called Fabian Leadership Network. And basically we sort of do 4 residentials. We've just concluded our last one, and we have a final Parliament day where we present campaigns that we want to present to MPs. We did a kind of preliminary one earlier on last year, and now we've got our final one. And they said to all of us attendees, hey, could you please prepare your final campaign? This could be on violence against women and girls, so you can guess what I'm going to present.
Yeah, good.
There's some really interesting mechanisms that we've basically identified to be able to influence government on a really measurable and tangible level.
Yeah.
And that firstly comes from making misogyny a hate crime and keeping on consulting with different groups.
Oh, thank you.
Did you want to come in?
Chris, did you have your hand up at one time? Go ahead.
Yes,
I should say Chris is the chair of the Dijon Twinning Committee of York, so he's got a large flock.
Thank you very much. One of the biggest challenges that I come across on a regular basis is, on the one hand, the need to call out unacceptable behaviour, but then on the other hand, being encouraged to be respectful for the behaviours and philosophies of other cultures. Can anyone just give me an example of how you can be both respectful and challenge when necessary?
So I suppose that's a very hard one and a really good question. I don't have all the answers on that one, but there's a campaign actually run by Sadiq Khan, which I think it starts with distract, delegate, and then there's a third element to it. But the idea is basically you're checking whether the woman in question is comfortable. You're giving her an out without being aggressive or getting yourself into a confrontation that might not actually be a particularly responsible thing to do. And you are involving others. So you might just go up to the person and say, oh, hey, do you have the time? And then pretend to be their brother or whatever it is that you need to do. Because obviously it's a case-by-case basis and it's nuanced. Like, I'm not going to be able to give you a one-size-fits-all answer. But it comes back to this lack of recognition of what misogyny is, and that it is a holistic definition with cyber violence and sexual violence and financial and coercive control and emotional and psychological. So when you look at it as that umbrella, then the answers start to become clear. But because you know, like if you were gay or of an ethnic minority, under the law, you can, because you have that protected characteristic that is reflected in sentencing. At the moment, as has happened to Jess Phillips, for example, she's a huge advocate for women's rights. I'm sure you know who she is. She's been threatened with rape live in an interview, and she can do nothing about that. And it's not about obviously criminalizing someone for free speech, in quotation marks, but it is about being able to map and collate and recognize that clearly escalatory pattern, and then have that as something that you can refer back to in a framework of data when you are deciding what to sentence a perpetrator. Barbara. I think you're muted. You're muted. There's always one.
Yes,
You're on there.
sorry. I always cover things because I'm I'm very much an Amnesty International person. I always cover things from a human rights perspective. So in fact, you know, the baseline for male and female and cultures are all the same. But what's an interesting point that I think of when we talk about what are traditions and what are cultures. For example, Africa has a not a very much used African Human Rights Convention, in which they say we must be able to uphold our traditions. And then there's a rider, except when they are harmful. And I think that's when people have to rethink, are your traditions harmful within the general framework of universal human rights? So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Can I move? I'm aware we've got Cecilia for only another 20 minutes, and I respect that. Can I move on slightly, and maybe Leah can come back on this area, because I could rant about the role of men for ages in all this, because I think they're to blame in many cases, to put it bluntly. But seriously, can we just move on to you know, our burning problem is engaging with young people. And I mean, the idea at the top of our head, is it possible for you to systematically contact all your members, and I don't know, in Yorkshire, and I don't know how many that might be, and say, and I'm sure I'm speaking for adjoining groups who are all just struggling. You see the size of us, we're all struggling to exist in this desperate political crisis. And actually saying to all young people, this is your local group, or if not, you can give them my email. I'll find out their local group. It should be on the European Movement website, although that's not totally up to date, and some places don't exist anymore, sadly. But let them know where there's some life and where there's some willing people doing things, so they've got somewhere they can hook up to. And if they want to come to York to have a European Movement stall on Saturday morning, us old people will happily keep out the way, or we'll join with them. I mean, they can do what they like, and we'd like to facilitate young people's involvement in our cause publicly. So if you could sort of take that away and think about how they all might be told of this option, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. There's an easy answer to that one. So our annual general meeting is coming up on the 12th of April, and we would ideally have all of our members there. It's going to be online for greater accessibility. And as well as that, given the secretariat that we now act as for the EU-UK Stronger Together networks, of networks, in our next meeting, I can just simply say, hey, York for Europe exists, here's Don's email, do get in contact if that's where you live and you're interested in setting something up. That's
great, and you can actually tell them, as of from our meeting this week, we are having it won't be a Yorkshire for Europe. We're not forming a supergroup, but we are actually liaising to fill up a lot of the rural gaps to do exactly this with stranded older folk. So we will dovetail nicely if you can set that initiative going. And I mean, anybody who from Beverley comes in touch with me, I can send them on to the right people or help them start a group. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to. I think the challenge I personally face, and I think quite a few of my board who are about 30, 31, we're not students anymore. So
we don't have direct access into universities. The main thing you want to do is get a foothold in the university freshers fairs. Now, we do have a good few people at student level, and we're trying to bring them in, particularly as like event directors, campaign directors, and things like that. But the main thing is getting a stall at freshers fair, because from then you could set up a European society, and then that, just like LSE and UCL, can go on a very positive trajectory.
Yes, I don't know whether other universities do it, but we've tried to get a freshers' fair stall, and it costs a ridiculous amount.
Yeah, it does.
We're regarded as a commercial enterprise, but
Correct.
we'll still keep trying. We couldn't afford it this year, frankly.
So the way to get around that is to partner with a society that already exists on campus. So societies obviously can have their own stalls, but you as a commercial organization, outside organization, would need to pay money. So the best thing to do,
That's a good idea.
put in, is to look at the universities that are in your general area. Look at the societies list. The student associations always have a list of all the societies with contact information. Go on their Facebook, send them an email saying, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you want to organize an event together? Do you want to partner with us? Anything like that, to build the relationship with a society instead of a single person, because for longevity, so for reaching young people, students are fantastic. For longevity, students are your absolutely worst nightmare.
Yes.
Because they're there for 3 years and then they leave. And I had that but you need them. I had that in Edinburgh. So I was trying to establish an Edinburgh branch of, the Young European movement. And the thing that we came up against is that I wasn't a student at Edinburgh University, and we couldn't find anyone that was willing to, to set up a society. But by building a relationship with already existing societies, you're sort of tapping into a pre-existing network. Which can be incredibly helpful. And then the other thing I'd probably recommend is on the longevity of students, or the problem with that is that a lot of classes are nowadays online. So, the after effects of COVID, that a lot of students don't necessarily have this campus life anymore, who's potentially quite interesting for your young professionals. So maybe there is some network in York or around there that has, if you say in London, we've got London young lawyers, maybe there's, York young lawyers, or I know that there was, I studied up in Aberdeen, I can't quite remember what it was called, but, there was so many professionals networks. And if you just get in touch with them and say, hey, this is what we're doing, do you want to do an event together? It doesn't need to be massively like, let's rejoin, let's do X, Y, Z. It can just be on, let's discuss this, and just to start building those relationships with young professional and student network can be incredibly helpful.
That's very helpful. Thank you both.
Yes, I wanted to agree with that and mention something we did for our campaign. So when we first conceptualized this campaign right at the beginning of last year, we hosted this event in Europe House with Frances Fitzgerald. So she's the MEP who spearheaded the directive criminalizing violence against women and girls, which was ratified by all EU member states. So basically, she's a hero of mine. She's absolutely incredible. And we went, okay, this is not a particularly politically palatable subject. Everyone wants to talk about youth mobility, as still do we, but we have identified this as a youth priority by going to Brussels and working with organizations that polled young people across Europe who said, okay, actually, this is what youth care about, safety, and the current sort of divergence that we're seeing, particularly now, in radicalization of young men and rising gender-based violence against women. And what we did was we conducted this huge stakeholder mapping initiative. So we have now the stakeholder map of about 200 to 250 organizations, and we split them up by who knows who, who's got who on LinkedIn, and are they an organization basically that aligns with our interests? So are they women's rights focused? Are they European focused? Are they youth focused? Great. And then we just split that across our board and went, okay, so I know people in European Institute for Gender Equality. Great. So I'm going to text Carleen Cheel and say, could you back our campaign? And so basically we just went through doing that. And that's a great way to kind of bring in new members. It can be a way to connect with maybe a European society even if it's online. You could also connect with like LSE European Society and do a collaborative event with them online. So for example, with that stakeholder mapping, Leia then led on creating a partnership with a European affairs newspaper called Europinion, and then they reported on the launch, which we did in Europe House a year later, about a month ago. And we had, of course, Frances Fitzgerald, as I said, the founder of Male Allies UK, so Lee Chambers, she's brilliant. Sana Lepolda, she is Director General of Parliamentary Democracy in the European Parliament, and Emma Nilsson, so she is an ex-BBC reporter and she chaired the whole thing. And Europinion then reported on that for us. And so now that's now getting picked up by different press outlets. So Byline Times has just interviewed me. Another one, British Youth Council, interviewed me. And it's slowly kind of climbing the awareness agenda, if you like.
Thank you. Can I just, Graham, are you speaking from Orkney?
Yes, just for those who don't know me, my name is Graham Martin. I was part of York for Europe for many years, particularly the People's Vote years, and then I moved to Orkney, which is still sort of within the UK, even if we sometimes think we're part of Norway. No, the point I was going to make, just contributing to the discussion, the two societies at the university that come to mind immediately are the Greens and the Lib Dems, partly because I suspect we've got contacts, second-hand contacts with them already, in as much as in both cases, if we go to people like this James thingy in the Lib Dems and Emily.
Yeah, we can, that's good ideas.
We've got Greens as well. They will know, they should know who their students are. I know occasionally University of York gets a bit disconnected from the city, but they will probably know who the student groups are, and will then hopefully be able to kind of get that conversation going. I think those are probably the easiest to go with. I know it does kind of end up pinning us a little bit on parties, but yeah.
Thanks for chucking that. Can I also, again, very aware of time, just very briefly introduce the gentleman, William Stewart, who's known as Hamish, who is the UK chair of the Hanseatic League, who's based near Beverley. And I see you nodding. That's another route that we're adopting and actively supporting to actually keep European cultural exchange and friendships alive. Do you want to just very briefly, Hamish, introduce yourself and say what you're doing, please? You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the Hanseatic League is a very old thing. It's been going since the 13th century, and it went for 500 years. They were traders, and they traded throughout the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, and right up to beyond Orkney, up to the Iceland and places like that. Eventually, they faded out in actually 500 years later, so they lasted a long time. And then in 1980, in Holland, they decided, well, yes, in the Netherlands, they decided to restart it. And the idea was not so much trading; it was to try and keep the youth of Europe together. And they were lucky because that was a time that the communist states were just all falling apart, and they all wanted to have some Western input. And so very quickly they had close on to 200 different towns and cities throughout Europe. And today they've got 184, and they're all doing extremely well. And it's a very good way of integrating the European peoples, and particularly the young. And we've been members in Beverley for 4 years now, and we go every year to the meeting that they have, which is called the Hansetag. And this is where all the cities meet in various different, there's a different Hanseatic town that does it every year. And this year we're off to Visby, which is in the middle of the Baltic, on Gotland, the island. And I'm very pleased that Don and Barbara are joining us. And of course we have young people there as well. The problem is that they only allow 2 young people from each town to go every year. Otherwise, it would be just swamped. So we thought, well, what we'll do in Beverley is we'll have all the young people here for our own mini Hansattag, only young people. And this has been, we started it last year. It's incredibly enjoyable, and everybody had a really good time. And it gave us the opportunity of our people, our young people, mixing with them, and they were talking different languages and all this sort of thing. So they learnt an awful lot, as well as had a lot of fun. And it's actually coming up again in April, and so we're going to actually host it in York this time, whereas it was in Beverley last time. And again, we will have all these young people from across Europe, and it keeps people together. And I think a lot of them realised that they realised that they were just the same as the kids next door in the other European countries. And so that's where we are. It's much more difficult this year than it was last year. And the reason for that is all grants that we've ever had seem to have halved this year. And actually, even the Germans, who are normally very strong and easily, they get grants very easily, they're really struggling this year. So we are looking for another 5 young people aged 18 to 26. And if you know of anybody who might be interested in meeting lots of other people of the same age, please let me know. Don's got my...
Indeed, I'll pass anything through.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, he's William Stewart, but everyone knows him as Hamish. So thank you very much. Right, do you want to take back the chair for a few more minutes, Cecilia, before... you've got 5 more minutes. Do you want to summarise or request or do what you want?
Sure. Thanks, Hamish, by the way. That sounds great. Yes, I'll just put my LinkedIn in the chat, and then you can, and my email, and you can just send me an email. I can forward that to our YEM members network and see if there's anyone who fits that eligibility criteria. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention something really, really exciting. If you attended the AGM virtually or in person, then you'll know about this. But essentially, we're really, really proud to say that we have led on a rather historic moment in the whole of 75 years. European movement has never had a women's network. I was as surprised as I think a few people when I realized this. And essentially at the AGM last year, I wrote a motion to found one. I'd also set up a network for YEM. So we have a women's chat going on. And essentially, I just wanted to mention the fact that we are co-launching. So we're doing both online on the 7th of March, and that will be at 6 p.m. to 7:45. That's launch 1 of 2. So the second one will be in Parliament, and that will have a whole different set of speakers, a different format, and obviously have a networking reception afterwards. But that is for men as well. We want you to come along. We don't want it just to be a women's thing. It's so, so important that men support this and lead it and be active in it too. You know, we're not just creating some exclusive little thing where we bitch about you. We really want your involvement and input as well. So speaking, we have Frances Scott. She is the founder of 50/50 Parliament. That's the organisation I mentioned, which works on gender parity in Parliament. We have Sarah Hyde. She is chair of the Fabian Society and formerly chair of the Fabian Women's Network, many of whom are now MPs. We also have Baroness Carmen Smith. You should definitely come to this, because if you want to get young people involved, she's your person. She's 29, I think now. She's the youngest member of the House of Lords. She's a trailblazer in her own right, and she has a lot of energy. So if you want to talk about shake-up energy, she epitomizes it. And she's also, of course, one of the vice presidents of the European Movement. I will be chairing, and Emma Nagg, so our deputy CEO, will be giving it an opening address. And we will have functions for people to introduce themselves on the chats, send contact details to each other, and then get follow-up information like when's the physical launch, what networking events are we doing, you know, what kind of initiatives are we going to support, who wants to be involved in leading it, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, just wanted to mention that, and that is really exciting. So we are in the process of reaching out to a million people to say this is happening, and please do share it with your own networks. You know, obviously it's online, so it's very accessible. You can bring friends along. You can bring anyone of a European persuasion who might be interested in hearing from some really incredible speakers. And yeah, just to close from me, thank you so much for having us. I empathize with you on the challenges of attracting and retaining youth interest and involvement. I feel you, I get it every single day. You know, as I said, we are a team of very limited resources. Sometimes we have dropouts. Some people don't turn up to things. Who knows? You know, like it's sometimes it's chaos, but it's chaos that we love, and it's chaos that we are passionate about continuing, because at the end of the day, we are all united in goals. And I think the main thing to remember, even when you're having difficulties, even when things aren't going your way, is that you all are united, and you're all on the same side, and you all want the same things, even if you think that looks a little bit different to you. And to always just remember to have that at the forefront of everything that you do. So thank you for me. Leah, anything you want to say?
Well,
Nothing
thank
to
you
add.
very much. And it is 2020, so I'll come to my word. I'll let you go now. Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you, and I hope we see you again. So I'll just say to everybody else, we've got another few minutes. If Leah's happy to field any general questions, that will probably fill up our hour, and that'll probably be a lovely long evening for all of us then. So thank you, Cecilia, and all the best.
Thank you so much. I'll put the link for the launch in the chat.
Yes,
Thanks,
I
everyone.
noticed you've got a message for you in the chat, which you'll no doubt pick up.
Thanks, Cecilia. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, any questions or really on any area that we've covered?
Just leave it talking.
Is it Lillian wanting to ask a question? No.
No, it's fine. Thank you. Enjoying listening.
Good for you.
I've got one for Leah, Don.
Peter, please.
Yeah, you mentioned to become friends of the young European movement. How do we do that as an older person?
Let me just get the link up, and I will post it in the chat as well. Lots of links flying around. There you go.
Okay. We can certainly put it on our next notes, Peter, if we get it. Oh, we've got something there. Yeah, we've got it there.
Right. Yep, thank you.
Right, a web link. I can save those notes. Any other questions? Let's see, Barbara. Yes, go on.
Yes. Just Leah, I mean, you obviously were in Scotland before, now you're down south. What's the spread of membership? Is it generally widespread, or is it sort of London based?
Very London based, I would say. I think for us that's a challenge that we're facing right now as well. So you have so many young and passionate people in London, and you have so many young and passionate people elsewhere, but that don't necessarily, you know, have active local groups. So in London, it's so much easier to recruit people. We have regular meetups and all of that, but in other parts of the country, it's a bit more difficult to do that, and it's a bit more difficult to get people involved. For example, our head of policy is in Northern Ireland. One of our members just moved to Brussels, so it's very spread out. But obviously, we have a harder time staying connected to these groups because they're not quite as big as London is. And you know, you always need someone to organize these meetups. It's hard to find someone that's willing to say, you know what, yes, I'm going to organize an event every month, every 2 weeks, something like that. Which is something that I always really admired about Scotland. Scotland had such strong local groups. You know, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Fife, Aberdeen, and all of that. Barbara, again.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've just
Oh.
no, not again. No, lower hand. That's right.
Anybody else? We've got a few more minutes, and ask any questions of any of us for that matter.
Tech support, happy to provide that.
Right.
Well, just reading the local press this evening.
Yes.
They're talking about the university having to make severe cuts because of a fall in international students. This is happening apparently in a lot of the Russell Group universities. And is this another dire result of Brexit?
Answer yes, but someone
Yes.
more qualified than me. I mean, I've read and heard that of York University.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem is that and I can say this, so I'm a German national, and I studied in Scotland for free because that was back then the deal that Europe had with Scotland. But even back then, we would pay home fees. So European students would pay home fees in England and then no fees in Scotland. And ever since Brexit, we now have to pay full fees, so full international fees. And I think that's just putting a lot of people off if you can study, for somewhat less money in, let's say, Sweden or Germany is more or less free. And I think universities are really going to struggle with that, especially because then the international student quota is going to get filled up by other countries.
Thank you, Julie. Any other points people want to make or ask? No. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I must admit, we've had two I'm not being patronising, but two very articulate speakers who cover a lot of ground very quickly. So I'm not surprised. They've done it all in an hour. They're obviously used to doing it. So thank you both. As I've said, I haven't heard from Cecilia. I don't think I will, that she doesn't want me to put this on on YouTube and then links to our website. We'll get a host more views there than we will here, which I really hope so, because I am apologising that there have been so few people tonight. But it is typical. Whenever we're out on stall, we're a bit like the dustbin people, because everyone's really grateful for what we're doing, but nobody wants to get really involved in doing it. And we're always getting people who, oh, you're great, you're still going, oh, you're doing some fantastic work. And you also come to a meeting and, oh, well, actually, my husband wants to take me out. And there's always a reason.
There's always a reason.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I really enjoyed this.
Great.
And I hope hopefully this is a start of a longer lasting partnership.
Well, I say, do put York on the map. We've got good friendships and links to most things that go on around us. And we need support and friendships and encouragement at times. So it's nice that you've given up the time and you've come with some smiles and good news as well. So thank you very much. And I'll say thank you for everybody for joining us, and good night.
Yep, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.